welcome to SKToThePoint. Today we are going to look at a very important topic, and it's just a few days after Israel has commemorated its first year anniversary of the brutal attacks by Hamas, which happened in October 7, 2023, where Hamas launched a series of coordinated attacks on Israel, resulting in over 1,200 deaths, including 46 Americans and more than 200 held hostage. This event shocked the entire world with the scale and the brutality that was being live streamed across social media platforms. It wasn't just a random attack uh, or a random act of violence, but the culmination of the 18 months of careful planning by some of the most dangerous actors in the global terrorism space is what we are going to look at today. And that's the topic for today's video at Escape to the Point. Today's video is going to be based on this exclusive report prepared and released by ex-CIA operative Sarah Adams. Sarah has been known to have been part of numerous anti-terror operations in the past, working for the CIA, and she has come out with a lot of new information in terms of how the October 7th attacks on Israel was planned, not just by the Hamas, but by the entire terror infrastructure that is active as we speak today. This report sheds light on the mastermind behind these attacks, and not just that. The interesting, or rather the terrifying reality of what this report tells us is that the October 7th attacks in Israel was just phase one. According to the findings, this was just like a stepping stone for larger attacks to be planned across Europe and even the US homeland. So, what makes the October 7th attacks even more alarming is the complex web of terror organizations involved. Hamas, a group largely operating within Gaza, didn't act alone. Behind the scenes, they were supported by a far reaching network, including the Al-Qaeda, the Afghan Taliban, and of course, Iran's IRGC. This operation was orchestrated not in Gaza alone, but we also learned that it was also to do with Afghanistan, far away from Israel's borders. The collaboration between these groups do paint a worrying picture for the future of global terrorism. Historically speaking, these organizations they mostly worked independently, often competing for influence in the different regions that they were part of. But now it looks like they have formed a unified front with one clear goal: to strike at the heart of Western interests. The report describes how these groups plotted the attacks in secret, using encrypted applications like Telegram to communicate and coordinate, far from the reach of international intelligence agencies. Now, let's talk about the key figures who orchestrated these attacks. At the center of the plot were top officials from Iran's IRGC, Al Qaeda leaders, and the Taliban's ruling elite. Among them was Brigadier General Mohammad Kazemi and Colonel Ali Rezai, part of IRGC's intelligence operations. It is said that they worked very closely with Hamza bin Laden, the son of Osama bin Laden, and Saif al-Adel, another senior Al-Qaeda officer. The Taliban's leadership, including Haibatullah Akhundzada, Sirajuddin Haqqani, and Mullah Yaqub Mujahid, also played critical roles in facilitating the operation. It's interesting to note that I think a month or so before this report was released by Sarah Adams, I had actually put out a tweet saying that I could see a lot of indications towards the resurgence of Al-Qaeda. And my tweet was based on certain conversations I've been having with international experts and counterterrorism SMEs across the globe. And I could see a pattern or a trend where I could kind of sense the resurgence of Al-Qaeda. So what's more interesting in this report, probably one of the most interesting aspects, is the rising role of Hamza bin Laden. Though he wasn't officially the leader of Al-Qaeda at the time when these attacks were being planned, his involvement in these attacks has, in fact, shown that there's been a steady ascent of Hamza bin Laden within the organization. Following the death of Ayman al-Zawahiri in 2022, Hamza is assumed to have taken a more prominent role in directing Al-Qaeda's operations, positioning him as a central figure in the terror organization. But what's important here is that the key mastermind wasn't just one person. When we compare it to 9/11, it was just Osama bin Laden. But here, this was basically a joint effort between groups that previously had conflicting interests, like I told you before. The report reveals how Hamza bin Laden coordinated with Saif al-Adel and the Taliban leaders to ensure that all the different factions were basically aligned to carry out this joint operation. This operation is basically a reflection of how these terrorist groups are evolving, moving beyond isolated attacks and collaborating in ways we've never seen before. So, what we know from the report is that the planning for the October 7th attacks began roughly around March 2022 at a secret meeting in Afghanistan. At this meeting, top terrorist leaders from Hamas, Al Qaeda, and also the IRGC, and also the Taliban were present. to discuss the strategy. Yet another interesting aspect here is the date, October 7th, which was the date of the attack, wasn't chosen at random. The report says that Saif al-Adel of Al-Qaeda specifically proposed October 7th, 2023 as the attack date because of its symbolic importance. What's the symbolic importance? Is that the same day in 2001, the US launched Operation Enduring Freedom following the 9/11 attacks, where they went after the Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan. This symbolic connection basically underscores how these groups view their battle as a continuation of a war that's decades old. It's a chilling reminder for them that this conflict is far from over. It's ongoing, and the West is still very much in their crosshairs. In terms of the planning, interestingly, not everything is said to have gone very smoothly within the ranks of the Taliban. Internal power struggles, particularly involving Sirajuddin Haqqani, has created some friction during the planning process. However, despite these challenges, the attack plans continued without significant disruption. The report also specifically highlights how Telegram became the preferred communication platform for these groups, allowing them to coordinate the attacks in real time, maintaining secrecy from international intelligence agencies. Iran's involvement in this plot is one of the most alarming findings of the report. The IRGC has long been known to support proxy groups like the Hamas and Hezbollah, but this report shows the extent of its collaboration with Al Qaeda and the Taliban. Iran wasn't just providing financial support; they were also actively involved in the planning and execution of the attack. Saif al-Adel, who is a key Al Qaeda commander, is now known to be Iran's primary interlocutor, and this is a dangerous alliance that has allowed Al Qaeda to operate with significant influence in the region. The strategic relationship between Al Qaeda and Iran is, of course, not new. For years, senior Al Qaeda leaders were harbored in Iran in safe houses, protected by the IRGC officers. What we do know is that Iran's interest in this alliance goes beyond its rivalry with Israel. By supporting groups like Hamas and Al Qaeda, Iran seeks to challenge the Western influence in the Middle East, rather, to say the rising Western influence in the Middle East, using terrorism as a tool to advance its geopolitical goals. Sarah Adams also reveals how Iran helped facilitate the movement of terrorists, providing safe havens for Hamas operatives in Afghanistan and other regions. The Taliban is said to have allowed Hamas, Al Qaeda, and other terrorist organizations to operate multiple training hubs in southern Afghanistan away from international scrutiny. These training camps specifically are said to be located in provinces like Helmand, Nimruz, Oruzgan, and Zabul, with six key terrorist hubs identified. These terrorist camps, mind you, were not just for basic training. They offered advanced combat techniques, including urban warfare, specialized military tactics, and the use of modern weaponry. The report also indicates that Al Qaeda's Abdullah bin Laden, Hamza's brother, oversaw many of these training sessions. What makes this more disturbing is that these camps weren't only attended by Hamas operatives. Fighters from other terrorist organizations, including Iranian affiliated groups, were trained alongside these Hamas fighters, including a broader coalition of forces, possibly preparing for future global attacks across US and Europe. Among the most prominent training locations in Afghanistan was the Shorabak camp, formerly known as Camp Bastion, where Qari Obaid Omari and the Libyan Al Qaeda training groups worked with Hamas. This level of coordination and cooperation that this report indicates, between these groups and the lack of action from international intelligence on the same is quite alarming, if true. I need to add the caveat that, if true, because you will have to understand that Sarah Adams is a former CIA operative, and there could be many things that she says which could be true, but there could also be certain amount of misinformation. So we'll have to take everything with a pinch of salt. According to some of the satellite imagery, pictures received by Sarah Adams, where she's mentioned about them in the report, these camps which were identified were heavily fortified, and movements of fighters were conducted discreetly. Despite some warnings from volunteers in Afghanistan, it remains unclear what, if any, action was taken by intelligence agencies to stop these training camps. The scale of these camps suggests that this was just phase one of a much larger operational plan. Another critical element of the report is the funding part, the funding behind the attacks. Shockingly, a portion of the financing for the October 7th attacks is reported to have originated from US taxpayer dollars. How, you ask? The US basically provides up to $87 million weekly to the Taliban for humanitarian aid and counterterrorism efforts. But of course, some of these funds were easily diverted to finance their terrorist operations. While not surprising, but certainly disturbing, these revelations suggest that the US funds meant to aid the Afghan population are being used by the Taliban's political office in Doha, Qatar, From there, these funds are funneled to terrorist organizations like the Hamas, Al-Qaeda, and the IRGC. Sarah Adams' report also outlines a complex financial network with Mohammad Suhail Shaheen, the head of Taliban's political office, overseeing the distribution of funds. It is said that a significant portion of this money, these funds, are used to fund training camps, pay fighters, and also support logistical operations across the Middle East to support any kind of terror activities or operations. On the other hand, the fund also supports Taliban's ministries of defense and interior, whose officials were also known to be directly involved in the plotting and execution of the Hamas attacks. The financial aspect of this operation goes deeper. The report also uncovers how Iran's IRGC funneled additional funds to support the attacks, with monthly covert meetings held between Iranian officials and Taliban's leadership to exchange US dollars for operational support. This funding stream was also linked to a broader plot targeting the US homeland in retaliation for the assassination of Qasem Soleimani. The implications of this are clear. If US taxpayer dollars are being used to fund terrorism, then an immediate oversight and corrective action is definitely necessary from the American intelligence to prevent further attacks. The report also calls for an urgent investigation into how these funds were diverted and how to prevent further misuse of these funds. One of the most sobering warnings in the report is that the October 7th attacks were merely a prelude to something much larger. The masterminds behind the attacks see this event as just the first step in a broader terror campaign aimed at destabilizing the Western nations and their powers. The report also interestingly outlines how Al Qaeda, under the leadership of Hamza bin Laden, is planning follow up attacks across Europe and even the mainland US. The tentative timeline for these attacks is something that we realize is 2025, and these attacks are designed to have far reaching impacts similar to that of 9/11. The report does make it clear that this isn't a hypothetical threat. It's real, and it's an unfolding plan that intelligence agencies need to be wary of and address immediately. In addition to these attacks, we also understand that Al Qaeda is reportedly forming an Islamic army, uh, probably something to rival the old Daesh or the ISIS. And it's being directed by Hamza bin Laden and led by Hamza al Ghamdi, with recruitment efforts spanning multiple regions in the Middle East. This army is basically intended to replicate Taliban success in Afghanistan and create a new base of operations in Mali. Interestingly, in the African continent, which they hope will become a launching point for attacks on Western nations. The implications of this are clear. If the West doesn't act now, we could be facing an even more dangerous wave of terrorism in the coming years. This isn't just about Israel anymore, or even the Middle East anymore. It's a global battle for security that could hit home at any time in any large country. Another interesting aspect of this report is that it doesn't hold back when it comes to criticizing the intelligence agencies, the American intelligence agencies to be precise, particularly because it calls the October 7th attack a damning indictment of the US intelligence community, which failed to track the masterminds behind the operation, despite many of them being on target. This failure to monitor high value targets like Hamza bin Laden and Saif al Adel basically allowed the attacks to proceed unhindered. And I think the most important factor in the loss of intelligence capabilities has to be the American withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021. I'm sure it has played a major role in this oversight. General Frank McKenzie, the former head of U.S. Marine Forces Central Command, stated that the withdrawal resulted in the loss of almost 98 to 99% of intelligence capabilities in the region, especially from Afghanistan. And it's no surprise that Afghanistan has been used as a base for training the Hamas fighters. This failure, we have to understand, isn't just about the past. The report also warns that the US and its allies are still vulnerable to future attacks unless there is a major overhaul in the way intelligence operations are conducted for to rent 2024 and 2025. Because as intelligence agencies evolve, the terrorist groups also evolve. They find new ways in which they can prepare a terror attack, new ways in which they can communicate and coordinate these attacks, and new ways in which they can plan and train their fighters as well. So in that sense, I think there is a requirement for a major overhaul, and robust counterterrorism strategies are required to be in place to stop further recurrences of the October 7th attack in Israel. So what does all of this mean for the global community today? The report closes with a call to action, urging Western nations, specifically the US, to take decisive steps before it's too late. So what are those steps? The first step is to halt all US funds flowing to the Taliban and officially terminate the Doha deal, which has allowed terrorist organizations to operate under the guise of diplomacy. The report also calls for an increase in bounties on key terrorist leaders, specifically people like Hamza bin Laden, Mohammad Kazemi, who continue to plot against the West. It's not enough to simply monitor these threats, but also, it's required that actions are taken to dismantle these terror networks and also prevent further attacks on innocent civilians. To conclude, I think we cannot really look at the October 7th attacks as an isolated incident. This was basically, now we understand, was part of a larger, more dangerous global plan that could impact the entire world. This report by Sarah Adams reveals a terrifying reality, if true, in the sense that Hamas, Al-Qaeda, IRGC, and many other terror groups, which could be split across the globe, may be coming together and coordinating in a very efficient manner. And also, their ultimate goal looks to be, striking at the heart of Western nations. Based on the report, the next phase of this operation, coordinated between the different terror groups, is already in motion, with plans targeting many parts of Europe and US already in motion. And 2025 is not very far away. If we don't act now, we could be facing a new era of global terrorism that could have devastating consequences. Let me know what you think about this entire topic, the report, etc., the comments. And thank you for watching as usual. And as always, stay informed and stay vigilant. Cheers.